I I'm Andres Lopez, your SDEC for Senate District 25. I have a very special guest today, Gabrien Gregory. He is running for Texas House 121.
Hey, Andres, can you hear me? Excellent. I'm excited to be here, Andres, and I want to thank you for your years of friendship and support in this campaign for state representative in District 121, which is a district that we share. For those who don't know me, I serve as a human resources officer in the Army Reserve, responsible for over 20 soldiers here at Fort Sam Houston. I'm also currently a substitute teacher in NEISD, adding a teacher certification to complement my degree in political science. I've served as an organizer for nearly a decade here in San Antonio and across the country as in an effort to support progressive issue-based campaigns and democratic campaigns. I grew up a military brat, the son of 2 Army veterans and an educator. I'm one of a handful of LGBT plus candidates on the ballot, and if elected, I'll be the youngest elected state legislator in the state at a time in 2022 when 1/3 of Texas voters are under 30 years old, and not one elected state representative or state senator in the legislature is under 30. So I'm running to bring true representation to an entire generation of Texans and those beyond, and fight for progressive values here in Texas.
Thank you for being here, Gabrien. In 2018 and 2020, this district went blue for Joe Biden and veto work. What would you do to ensure that we change our district to blue?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and it's really one of the most important questions. For those who are in the district, you'll know about Selena Montoya and her attempts in this race in 2018 and 2020. She was actually the first Democrat to run for this seat in 18 years. So if you think about it, there's a lot of Democrats and people from all backgrounds in this district that have been used to the same old. And it's time, and thanks to Selena partly and largely, it's time for people to wake up to the reality that this is a seat, this is a seat that we can flip. You know, Selena brought in over 40,000 new voters that hadn't turned out in years. And I believe with the help from my team and supporters like you, that the identified 15,000 voters that are Democrats alone that we have intentionally identified in the district, if we can pull out even 7,000 or 8,000 of them, and I believe that we can on this ballot in this year, a Beto year in Texas, where there are so many great candidates across the ballot, up and down the ballot, I think that we can flip this seat blue. We just need to get through the primary and head for November.
Yes. What's your number one thing that you will first do once you're in office?
Man, that's a hard one, Andres. I know you couldn't answer that either, right? There's so many issues to cover, right? And the beauty about this job is that you have so much room to prioritize and compartmentalize issues. You know, I'm running a progressive campaign so that if elected, we can prioritize the fight to fund our public schools, pay our teachers what they deserve, and protect students, whether it's due to the threat of gun violence or a global pandemic. As a substitute teacher at NEISD, I'm in the classes and work with these students. And I can tell you that education is probably the number one most attainable goal in working with colleagues in the ledge. You know, I'll tell you, the first day that I was a substitute, it was an enlightening experience because a 6th grade student came over to me, came over to the desk because he needed to talk and vent. It was the first day back from a break, and he told me that prior to this break that he had been in the principal's office. And so I asked him, you know, what were you in the principal's office for? And he told me that a friend of his threatened to shoot up the school. And he went on to tell me that his parents lost their job to COVID and that they just recently got their jobs back. These are the types of issues that our sixth grade minds are thinking about. And I think that that is probably the most concerning issue to me, and that if that's what they're thinking about, then we really need to increase the representation across the board in this state so that we can prioritize educating the future and make sure that they have options across the board, you name the issue, as we move forward. But other than that, I mean, I'll probably speak to more issues here in a minute, but one of the things I'm really excited about is sponsoring a bill that will legalize cannabis in Texas, because it's the right thing to do. I'd like to use the $1 billion in projected revenue over 2 years to directly expand Medicaid in a state where Governor Abbott and Texas Republicans have consistently refused to take any federal funding for healthcare access. And I'd like to use that money to directly lower prescription drug prices. That is going to help seniors, it's going to help veterans, it's going to help people struggling with mental health, it's going to help all of us.
Yes, yes, it is. Let's talk about healthcare. Healthcare is essential to everybody. They think it's the uh, the Republicans think it's not a choice, but it should be it should be everybody should be getting healthcare
Mm-hmm.
instead of not uh, not uh, not picking, saying, oh, this person doesn't get healthcare. It should be everybody getting
Mm-hmm.
healthcare.
Definitely. I mean, I'm with you, and I'm sure you've heard the same from your neighbors, because we're really close together, right down the street, right? um, I can't tell you how many doors I've knocked on over the years in our area where folks have told me that they can't afford their prescription drugs, they can't afford insurance. I've talked to diabetics and cancer patients. I've talked to folks who are older and folks who are younger. Across the board, this is one of the most vital concerns that we all have. And I'd say that in addition to my belief that healthcare is a human right and that nobody should have a lack of access to healthcare, especially in Texas right now, where we've seen Governor Abbott and Texas Republicans consistently attempt to restrict access. You take a look at, these reproductive policies that they have really slipped under the rug and created a national issue around in terms of the Supreme Court, which again today refused to take it up. The bottom line, as your representative, I'm going to go to Austin and fight to protect and restore abortion rights and reproductive freedom for Texas women in a state where we know, right, that we lead the developed world in the maternal mortality death rate. That is it's incomprehensible, really. And it goes into a lot more deeper rooted problems when it comes to healthcare access. At the end of the day, at minimum, I'm going to fight to increase access for everybody. But on a national level, I do wish that we approached and hopefully one day soon see healthcare for all across the country.
Yeah, uh, that's what we all need, and the Healthcare Affordable Act is really a good tool that we can all use and enforce that more, so more people can get health care.
And I'll say, because the past decade, you've dealt with this as well, and all of us are. When I talk to folks that maybe are homeowners or maybe have good jobs and have children or grandchildren, I always ask them to just for a moment, not just consider what your needs are, but consider whether your kids and your grandkids are going to be able to afford a home. The same goes for affording insurance. If they're uninsured, like some of the members in my family, And if it weren't for the fact that I'm in the military and have some healthcare coverage, I probably wouldn't be insured right now either. So it's about asking, what are we doing to make sure that young people in the state of Texas, and that all people in the state of Texas, are going to have the ability to be covered? That's really the question we need to ask, and we need to implement policies to ensure that they are covered.
And let's talk about our property taxes. The most that affects our district the most, because they are sky high off of the roof here in 121, especially when our school districts are charging like tons of money from that, and that comes from our legislator that won't touch that. I just don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, on this issue and so many others, I want to bring people to the table about whether it's healthcare, whether it's this, or any issue you can think of. We need to bring people to the table that are both impacted by that issue and the folks that have been working in and around that issue, organizers, business leaders, folks that are impacted in our neighborhoods, homeowners, and a lot of folks that are renters in this area that are cost burdened too. When it comes to property taxes, you referenced education and schools. We live in a state where in 2017, the county commissioner's court had to actually respond to Governor Abbott due to Texas Republicans' attempt at increasing the local tax burden, the local property tax burden on San Antonio residents like us. That's unacceptable. The bottom line is that if we increase education funding, if we increase funding for our schools, then the appraisal values will level off. Why is it that we live in a state where we consistently see rising appraisal values and rising property taxes, yet we're not using the funds that we're giving to support our public schools? That's a travesty. We need to fix that. And so if elected in Austin, I'm going to fight to ensure that property taxes, I'd like to be a part of the commitment to decrease or level off those property taxes and confront those who may not see it this way in Austin, and by doing just that, funding our public schools and funding education.
Yeah, because our local government can't do it, but the state can. The state can, and we need to be more efficient on that. I think that's the number one thing in 121 that people have. When
a lot of people do. You're right, and it goes back to something I mentioned earlier. If folks like me are out there concerned that they're not going to be able to afford a home one day, what about the additional cost of getting a home in the future, right? It's not just about purchasing a home, right? It's not just about buying a home. It's about, am I going to be able to afford the rising costs? Am I going to be able to afford the rising property values every year? Am I going to be able to afford to keep the lights on and pay all the rest of the bills, especially if I have a family in the future? Those are some broader points that we need to hit on, because parents like mine, they had it a little bit different in the generation they grew up. They were able to buy a home. They have their home bought off. I'm not sure if my brothers and I are going to be given the same value, right, in our society. So in Texas, we need to make sure that all people have the ability to live under a roof, period.
Yes, correct. Homeless issue. What's your stance on that?
Yeah, you may remember from the city council run that I'm one of the few who support housing first policies that aim to keep people in their homes and that open up opportunities for folks that are living on the street to have access to both care and again, having a roof over their head. That's got to be the goal. We live in a city where, whether we're talking about home ownership or renting or homelessness, we need to address the fact that we don't have a renters commission in this city. What are we doing to address cost burden residents who are renters across the state? What are we doing to address property taxes? But what are we also doing to ensure that funding is going to all of our local partners across the state that are on the ground working with our houseless residents? Housing first policies is the bread and butter of it. In Austin, I'm going to fight for housing first policies that aim to keep people in their homes and that provide resources for houseless residents. We saw an example of this recently here in San Antonio. We have a hotel downtown that the city finally, late in the game, but at least finally did invest in, so that local houseless residents downtown had a place to go and had a place to sleep. We already know that a lot of these partners like Haven for Hope and so many other organizations have direct contact with a lot of these community members. We need to bring them to the table. We need to bring people affected to the table to have a better conversation about what housing first policies look like on the state level to curb homelessness across the state, especially when it comes to our veterans, because I do personally believe that we should never have a homeless veteran. In addition, though, we should really not have any homeless residents unless they want it. And there are some that prefer it, and that's okay. But we need to make sure that they have resources too.
Yeah. Also, our district, there is a part of it that's very not very developed on that area, off of the I-35. What would you do to improve that?
Yeah, well, I mean, what's interesting about this is that we saw a shift in the district map after the Republicans in Texas have been able to get away with such drastic gerrymandering for so long. Thankfully, District 121 was not severely affected in the way that some districts were across the state. Some of the representative areas near I-35 were shifted over west. So now we're looking at even eastern parts of Stone Oak all the way up to the county line north. In terms of development, is there anything in particular that you're referencing? I mean, thankfully, we do have the privilege of being one of the more developed parts of San Antonio. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that everybody's at the table when we are speaking about developers and development. I'm not going to be the one that gives developers everything they want, period, whether it's on the state level or local level. I was fortunate to meet with some neighbors in the council run who said, who directly showed me development that was happening literally in their backyard, because the council locally, some of the members on council pushed through the developer needs and wants and didn't even look at the folks that were impacted by that development. So I think that we need to make sure that when we're talking about development across the board, that the people who are going to be impacted in our neighborhoods are the first ones at the table to tell us how they feel about it and whether they support it and how they're going to be impacted by it.
Yes. Let's talk about public education, how important it is. What would be your first thing to do in public education?
Yeah, well, first things first, I think that we need to pay teachers what they deserve. Representative James Tallarico up in Austin and Round Rock area, he introduced a bill that would have raised teacher salaries across the board to $70,000 a year. I think that is a policy that I can get on board with. At the end of the day, the minimum standard has to be fighting for teacher pay increases. And it doesn't just go for teachers, it goes for educators across the board. It goes for substitute teachers. It goes for the custodians that work in our schools. It goes for administrators. We need to make sure that those who are educating children and the future, and I know how hard that job is in classes, are getting paid what they deserve, that they're getting the benefits they deserve. And, this is causing a problem across the state, and especially here locally in San Antonio, where you've seen so many teachers out due to COVID and other circumstances. I've actually met teachers who have decided to quit teaching, even though that's their passion. They are done because they're not getting the value they deserve in this state. Governor Abbott has made it clear that teachers are not a priority in Texas, even though they are the most important inspiration for children and the future in this state. When it comes to retirees across the board, in terms of workers, in terms of teachers, we have not passed a cost of living adjustment, even though the cost of living has increased in San Antonio and across the state and across the country in 17 years. I'm in classes with high schoolers that have been in school as long as it's taken for there to be a cost of living adjustment. So that's another thing I'm going to fight for in the ledge. In terms of education itself, at the end of the day, I support making sure that municipalities and school boards have the resources and the ability to make decisions in the best interest of their segment of the community. We need to stop whitewashing history. Obviously, I'm not going to listen to Republicans talk about CRT when we know that that's not being taught in our schools. And we need to make sure that we're teaching history that is true and that's appropriate, so that the next generation of kids and the next generation of leaders have the resources and the education necessary to grow our society further.
Yes, yes. And what would on the TOS, what is it called now? TOS or TAS? The TOS test,
the tests, yeah.
The test. Do you agree or disagree with that? I disagree with that.
I disagree with it as well. I mean, we took them in school, right? I think that we need to make sure that kids are learning how to think and how to be engaged in our community and use that education to benefit not only themselves, but all of us in our community. That should be the priority goal. That's the goal that I hear from teachers talk about, right? These tests increase stress in an already overburdened system. It's overburdened teachers, it's overburdened students and parents. And we've seen the effects of these tests in Texas during COVID. Thankfully, people like Senator Jose Menendez and Representative Diego Bernal, local representatives here in San Antonio, pushed to create opportunities where students didn't have to take those during COVID. I think that was smart. So yeah, I mean, across the board, I don't support them, generally speaking. But at the end of the day, I go to Austin as a representative, and I think what's important is that we're bringing teachers, we're bringing educators, we're bringing students and parents to the table to have a better conversation about what the curriculum needs to look like and what our priorities are and how that translates into policy in Texas.
Yeah, that's very important to all of us. Let's talk about fixing our grid, where our state legislatures didn't do nothing on that.
Yeah, I mean, despite attempts from a lot of Democratic representatives in the delegation and senators in the Senate, not enough was able to get completed because Texas Republicans just refused to work with solutions for the future. I mean, first and foremost, we need to accept the reality that climate change is real, that we're going to see an increase in these types of storms and events in our communities across the state. Because of that, it's even more paramount that we weatherize all of our power facilities across the state. There were loopholes that Texas Republicans in the legislature created so that these gas companies didn't have to weatherize certain locations. So not every power source, power unit in the state is actually weatherized, and we know that these storms are coming. We're below 30 degrees today, and we're not sure if ERCOT and those who support the grid are going to even be able to operate to support us and our power usage. first and foremost, we need to make sure that every single facility is weatherized, and that there should be a no question to that. That should be zero tolerance. But we also need to take a look at getting on the national grid so that we can prevent these disasters from taking place and having serious impacts on people. We saw hundreds of Texans die as a result of that winter storm, and it is directly on the hands of Governor Abbott and Texas Republicans who refused for over 10 years to address the storm that happened in 2011 and make sure that Texans were protected if it happened again. And they failed that test. So we need to elect people who are actually going to consider the needs of people and make sure that all people have the power that they need to keep the lights on.
Yeah, that's the truth. Still remember the winter storm when we were
hard to forget, right?
We were all freezing when we saw the snow. We were like, okay, we have no power, and we were all like freezing in our house. We had to wear like double sweatshirts, double pants.
It was not a fun time.
No, it wasn't a fun time.
And I will say, Andre, something else, one more thing, if I may, that's really important. When we were running for council, we actually called up seniors in our community to make sure that they were okay and to ask whether they needed food and water. And I'm proud to be one of a few people in the community, a few leaders that worked with people to get them water and food. And I would like to see more state representatives, more state senators advocating and collaborating with the city partners and the city level elected officials to ensure that things like warming centers are always available, that we have a response plan for those that we represent in our community, because we saw that in San Antonio, we didn't have warming centers for over a 48-hour period. We didn't have resources ready to go when people lost their power. And I met neighbors on the door who struggle with certain health complications and needed electricity to literally survive. And they had to be taken to the hospital. And we saw cases where even medical facilities were having a hard time keeping the power on. So this is literally life and death, and we need to take seriously what's going to happen in the future. So we need to make sure that everybody's covered and that we're taking action on climate.
Yes, yeah, that's always true. Climate change, you've been talking about that. It's really important for all of us, because I believe in climate change. I believe our everything's changing here in Texas. It's not the same what it used to be like. Look, it's cold right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what people say, right? It's cold, it can't be happening, right? But that's not true. We know that's not true. And I'm proud to be a candidate in this race who is a member of Climate Reality Project, which Vice President Gore started in the early 2000s to rally people together to be leaders in their community to address climate action through policy, through business, and other routes. We can all do something to address this issue. We're going to have to. I don't believe there's a question that climate change exists. And I have Republican friends and independent friends who understand the threat that we face here, and they would like to do something about it. So I want to welcome everybody to this conversation to address it, because it's going to impact all of us, and it already is. In terms of what are we going to do about it? If elected in the state ledge, I'm going to support the Texas Climate Jobs Project recommendations that a lot of our unions across the state are behind. It's going to increase, potentially over 1 million jobs for Texans that are here in Texas. It's going to make sure that we have a population that's educated on renewable energy for the future. It's going to expand mass transportation, sustainable mass transportation options across the state. On that note, I'd like to see and fight for high-speed rail connectivity between our major cities in Texas, from San Antonio to Austin, from San Antonio to Houston, and so on. we need to not only take climate action seriously, but we need the legislature to do everything they can to ensure that carbon emissions are going down. I personally support being carbon neutral and net zero by a goal that we can fight for in the state ledge. I think it's going to be difficult to do so by 2050 as a state, but that's where my mind's at, because it's a necessity. We need to get there as soon as possible. We need to work with local partners to assist them on the state level in their attempts. You know, I'm proud that San Antonio actually does have one of the strongest climate plans in the country. In my personal opinion, it doesn't go far enough in certain areas of the plan, but it is something that we are leading the country in taking climate action and as a part of Climate Action San Antonio. On that note, Texas Climate Jobs Project is really the bread and butter here, because not only is it going to impact jobs, but it's going to allow Texas to be the leader in the United States and one of the leaders in the world when it comes to being the green energy capital of the country. What happens in Texas impacts the rest of the nation, and it impacts the rest of the world. We know that because we're so big and we're the capital of a lot of other energy sources. So I'd like to see a lot of those recommendations come to fruition in policy, and that's one of the things I'm definitely going to fight for in Austin.
Yes, yes. Let's talk about another important issue: veterans. Both of my grandfathers didn't get their veterans benefits right away because they didn't know how. Yeah, they didn't know how to get them. They got them on. They got them later in life. What would you do to ensure that veterans do get them early on life?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, right, as an Army Reserve officer myself and the son of two veterans, this is obviously something I'm very passionate about. And I think it's incomprehensible that we live in a state and a nation where there are so many veterans that are not educated about their benefits, that are not being assisted in so many ways. We still have veterans ending up on the street with lack of resources for they and themselves and their families. We still see veterans across the state of Texas having to drive, in some cases, hours to the nearest hospital so that they can get care. That should not be happening. I'd like to work on any policy that increases access for veteran benefits, for veteran education, for veteran healthcare access, and so on. That's really the bottom line for me. And I think that's going to be really important here in San Antonio. We know that we have thousands and thousands of veterans and military families here in District 121. And we have the leading number of veterans in population in the entire nation. So that's a huge issue that we need to continue to address. And I'd like to give a shout out to people like Senator Jose Menendez, who's a supporter of this campaign, for all the work that he's done in the legislature to bring those types of opportunities to veterans and their families. So it can be done.
Yes, yes. And the LGBT, the LGBTIA, with the transgender bill that they try to pass, made it so obvious that the Republicans just want to pass bad bills and don't care about what's real in Texas, like fixing the grid, or fixing our public education. What would you do to ensure gay people to have their to be equal to everybody else?
Yeah, I mean, you just said it, right? I mean, it's an unfortunate reality that a lot of the legislators in our state would rather railroad through policies that aren't even supported by Texans like you and me, the majority of Texans like you and me. That's not how we govern. That's not how representation works, just because they disagree with something because of whatever reason. What is the purpose of attacking these communities across Texas? Texas is one of those states that does not have a statewide non-discrimination bill. So if elected, I'm going to go to Austin and work with colleagues. I'm going to join the LGBTQ caucus that is fairly new, that only has 5 members. So presuming that nobody else gets elected in Texas in the LGBT community, I'm going to add an additional vote in our Texas House on these types of issues. This is obviously an issue that is personal to me. It's been inspiring seeing a lot of LGBTQ members of the community take notice of this campaign and block walk for me and block walk for the cause. And it's made a difference. It's inspiring to people when folks like us are on the ballot, right, Andres? In terms of policy, right, I want to hit on the non-discrimination bill pretty hard. Because it's going to cover a lot of LGBT community members, but it's also going to cover a lot of the other folks in the state that are consistently marginalized and discriminated against, like our Muslim friends and our Jew friends and our Black and brown friends, and you name it, the list goes on. This should not just be a state for white people. And unfortunately, a lot of the bills only benefit white people in Texas. What it comes down to, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent, is, do you believe that your children should be bullied or restricted from opportunity? And whether you subscribe to a certain political party doesn't matter. None of us want the next generation to live in a society where they're not valued. Everybody deserves to be valued, and everybody deserves to have, the same opportunities available. I want to work with colleagues to sponsor that bill. And I believe it's got to include protections for LGBT plus youth. It's got to make sure that they're covered in and out of school. We need to tackle religious exemptions that go against the LGBT plus community and businesses. We need to allow LGBT plus parents to adopt children at a time when there are so many children out there that need a good home, and there are plenty of people lined up in our community that are willing to take them in and be the best parents possible. We need a multitude of protections around housing and jobs and healthcare, places that we see a lot of LGBT plus people being discriminated against without any consequences or ways of reporting those. And I'd like to hit on one more thing. Texas and San Antonio are certainly on the list for populations dealing with increased issues around STIs and HIV. And that's an issue that impacts the LGBT community, and has for a long time. So I'd like to advocate both on the federal and state level to push insurers to cover HIV and STI testing, because it's going to help limit the spread of disease, and it's going to help keep a lot of people in our community safe. And we need to not be afraid to teach these things in our schools so that kids aren't getting sick, and that they know how to take care of it when it happens and prevent the spread to other people.
Yes, correct. And also, there's a really important issue here. Let's talk about Black Lives Matter. I think it's important to include them into our conversation, because they have been hurt through this system of just going through what they went through with their ancestors as being neglected. They couldn't get voting rights. They couldn't. They didn't have what the white man had. They had to work hard for they had, what would be to unite them into 121?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first things first, I believe Black Lives Matter, full stop. And I will do everything I can to be the best ally to that point in the Texas legislature. I think that we need to work with some of our Black members of the delegation in Austin that have already attempted to pass bills that are going to directly positively impact Black communities across the state. In this campaign, one of the things I'd like to do is see an increase in Black voter turnout here in our community, because the issues that we're fighting for impact all of us, period. Along with being able to say that Black Lives Matter, that's something that I think we need to bring a lot of people to the conversation around. And I think it's important that as a white male, that I am having those conversations with fellow family members and friends of mine that may not understand why Black Lives Matter, or why, as we often hear people argue, the point that they try to make, that because Black Lives Matter, does that mean other lives don't matter? That's not the point, right? We know that's not the point. We know that's not true. What we do know to be true is that we have a lot of work to do in this state to ensure that we are ensuring an equitable future for all Texans. And that includes under the umbrella of equity. That includes housing first policies. That includes making sure that healthcare is accessible to everyone. That includes legalizing cannabis and what impacts that's going to have on our criminal justice system. That includes making sure that our schools are equitably funded across the state. That includes that we are combating environmental justice concerns across the state and in pockets here in San Antonio and across the whole state, where communities of color and Black communities have been disproportionately affected by dumping and pollution and carbon and other factors that we need to tackle. So whether you name an issue, we need to make sure that everybody's represented at the table. I'm not going to be able to represent directly in certain ways everyone, so we need to make sure that Black voices are at the table in all of these conversations around the issues, so that we are doing everything we can to address them. And again, it goes back to making sure that we have an equitable future for Texans.
Yes, that's a very, very important, because I'm a Black Lives Matter person also.
Absolutely. And, we saw this week with voting rights that the Senate on the federal level couldn't take it up. I mean, we still see even Democratic senators like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema fail to address these issues. And just a few days prior, they were, writing posts about how significant Martin Luther King and other leaders are. That's hypocritical, and we need to elect a new generation of leaders that sees it as it is, that people are being affected, that when it comes to things like voting rights, Black lives are disproportionately not accessing those abilities and those rights in our communities. And it's going to take local representatives and elected officials up and down the ballot, getting them elected before we see any significant changes here in Texas. And we saw in Texas the bill, one of the most destructive voting rights bills, SB 1, passed last session, that is already coming to fruition here in San Antonio, with 1,000 mail-in ballots. Out of 1,000 mail-in ballots, 325 of them as of last week being rejected. And these are people from across all backgrounds. These are veterans, these are seniors, these are people who vote. These are American citizens that have the right to vote. And they're being put through the ringer in a process that's supposed to be accessible to them as Americans. So we need to make sure that whether you are Black or not, that everybody has access to things that are rights of theirs by our Constitution.
And they need to, on the application, make sure you're putting your last four digits and your driver's license on the application, pitting both, because I know they don't remember what they put on their voter's registration card. They need to pick both on, so they will be getting a mail-in ballot on there. And also, let's talk about uh, immigration. Let's talk about the fake border wall that that our ex-president was supposed to do, and our governor is wasting our his our money, our taxpayers' money, to build that fake wall. Uh, and how Hispanics uh, are the sleeping giant right now of this election. If we get our Hispanic voters to come out and vote, we win this election, guys.
Yeah, I mean, we are dealing with a situation right now where Governor Abbott has decided that his priorities include wasting millions of dollars, millions of our tax-paying dollars to fund a political stunt at the border by deploying thousands of National Guard members away from their families, away from their home, away from, in some cases, their better paying civilian jobs, not for an emergency, not for a crisis, not for an attack on Texas, but to literally sit at the border doing nothing because there's not a problem there. That pisses me off, frankly, as a taxpayer, that I'm funding that operation and that it's only vilifying a community that is as Beto O'Rourke puts it, coming here, choosing Texas, choosing the United States to thrive and to live out the idea of this American dream. We need to do everything we can to stop stunts like this. Our state representative that I'm running against, Steve Allison, actually voted to support those funds going toward that mission. He voted to defund the National Guard tuition benefits that our soldiers in the National Guard here in Texas were guaranteed upon their contracts, upon signing up to serve. That's not pro-military. That's not pro-veteran. That's not pro-military families. And in Military City, USA, I think that's going to wake a lot of people up to what Texas Republicans want to support, instead of making sure that our National Guard members and that our military families are getting the care that they need and the education benefits that they deserve and that they're guaranteed. We would rather strip those benefits and ship them off to the border away from their families. And I'll make one more point. We've seen National Guard members commit suicide at a time when I know very personally, having addressed this issue very directly as a platoon leader in the Army Reserve, that soldiers are taking their lives at alarming rates due to a lot of causes. We should be looking out for the mental health of our soldiers, and we should be looking out for the mental health of everyone in our community.
Yes, that's really, really true on all of those issues that we agree on. I would like to thank you so much, Gabrien, for your time. Close it out.
Yeah, well, Andres, seriously, again, I want to just thank you because you have been such a strong supporter. And for those watching, if you don't know, Andres has been involved in the party and in our community for a long, long time. I'm thankful for your support, Andres. Again, I'm proud to be in this race. This is a district that we can flip. It's possible. We've identified the community members out there that we are going to target to flip this seat and bring to Austin the youngest member of the state legislature and an additional LGBT plus community member. We are going to bring true progressive values and representation to an entire generation. And just because I say an entire generation doesn't mean that we're not going to take care of the issues that are affecting our seniors and other members of the community. It's about electing someone who actually truly represents all people in Texas, not just the special interest groups like Steve Allison, is in the pockets for, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Gabriel, for being here. Remember, early voting starts February 14th through the 25th, and March 1st is election day. Go out and vote Gabrien Gregory for Texas House 121. Thank you.